Boker Tov Givrin. Ma Shlomkem. Okay, we want to do translation, and we want to, you'll be graded on the translation as you translate orally. I'll be asking you to read it out loud and then to translate. And the first verse, let's start with Kenny. And if you would read down to the Athnak, please, the midpoint of the verse, and then translate.
Wayehi Bine
Shafot. Hashoftim.
Wayehi Ba'aretz.
Okay, and then translate.
Then it came to be when the judges judged. Then it came to be there was a famine in the land.
Okay, good, thank you. Wayehi, just as he translated, is so it came to be, so it happened. And when you have Wayehi beginning a book this way, it is considered a macrosyntactical particle. And as a macrosyntactical particle, you don't really need to translate it. You can translate the way Kenny did, or you could just say, in the days of the judges, when there was a famine in the land, and then you would continue on with Wayelek, because notice here you have two Wayehis in a row. And so both of these are looked at as macrosyntactic particles that are introductory to the book and get the time setting. They are temporal clauses. Shafot is a cal infinitive construct, but when you have it used in this type of context, notice it's in construct with bimei, in the days of, literally in the days of the judging of the judges. And when you have this duplication of roots, it's like dreaming a dream, and the judge is judging. And here, all you have to do is just say in the days of the judges or in the time of the judges. So you used another phrase for that in translating. When the judge is judged. That's acceptable as well. But you could just say when the judges ruled. Because the judging here is not just sitting in judgment. It's the idea that they governed. They governed. And so you could talk about it in the days of the judges, or in the days when the judges ruled, or in the days when the judges governed, when there was a famine in the land. Just taking the next one also as a temporal clause, and then we'd start off with the next one, which might give a hint to the next person to translate as to how to do it, but that's the way it goes. Sometimes you get a hint. And Gus, you're on for the second half, so if you'll read the second half aloud and then translate.
Wayelek.
Wayelek. Yelek.
Yelek.
Right.
Wayelek ish Bethlehem Yehuda la gur
Bistay.
Moab hu Weishto Ushnei Vanau.
All right, and then translate.
And the men went from Bethlehem of Judah to dwell to the country of Moab. He with his wife and his two sons.
Okay, it's a man. Notice ish doesn't have an article on it, and it's singular. So putting all this together with the first part, when the judges governed and when a famine was in the land, a man from Bethlehem of Judah went to sojourn or to spend a short time. The idea here is to go as a resident alien in the fields of Moab, which you could translate as in the country of Moab, he and his wife and his 2 sons. And you could have translated this by taking a man from Bethlehem, Judah, and his wife and his 2 sons went to sojourn in the fields or in the country of Moab. So you can change that to where you bring the subjects, all the subjects forward. When you have compound subjects, the verb often agrees with the first member of the subject. That's why the verb wayelek is a cal, imperfect, third masculine singular, agreeing with ish, even though the ish is repeated in who, and then you have a compound subject that is ishto ushne vanao. You have all of those people involved, 4 people involved. It's still a singular verb because it agrees with the first noun in the compound subject. The subject is delayed. In Hebrew, when you delay a compound subject this way, it's required that you repeat the main subject again. That's why you have the third masculine singular pronoun, personal pronoun, who. It's not that the man is referred to twice in translation necessarily, or in grammar, but that it's just required in the manner of speaking that it be repeated, so he's not left out in the compound subject. But you can often delay all the rest of the members of the subject until the end. But if you do so, you have to repeat the primary subject, and normally a personal pronoun is used. Okay, any questions on verse 1? Yes, Franz.
Barrick is Rishne, is that in construct form?
Yes, it is. Ushne is in construct.
So can you translate that as 2 of his sons?
You could translate it as 2 of his sons, but by context we find out that these are the only sons, and so just be his 2 sons. Okay, good question. Anyone else? Other questions? Because remember, the normal form would be Shanayim. You have Shanayim as the masculine number 2, and Shatayim for the feminine. All right? Yes, Gus?
The difference between dwell and, is that translated as dwell and sojourn? You said that one is more temporary and the other one is more...
Right. Yashav is the permanent residence where you settle down and reside. And gur is the idea of sojourning, spending a brief amount of time at the greatest length. It's being a resident alien. A resident alien can end up spending a lifetime in a country. Israel was a resident alien in Egypt for 450 years. And so gur can extend for quite a time, but you're never really a full citizen of the land in which you dwell. You are considered an alien. And we could translate it as a resident alien. Here, it was just for the purpose of being there during the famine, just a temporary escape. And so if you could translate that, demonstrate that in some way to show that it isn't that they lived there or that they're going there to stay there permanently, but it was temporary, all the better for your translation in making it clear. Okay, anyone else? Other questions on verse 1? Notice on the diagram I gave you, the macrosyntactical particle wayehi, I've separated the 2 to give the setting. They are temporal clauses. You could translate both of these as when the judges ruled, when there was a famine in the land, a man went. Notice that you have 3 wayik tol verbs, and you do not translate necessarily any of the vowels on those 3 wayik tol verbs, because the 2 wayehis are macrosyntactical particles, and because the third one follows after, and therefore is the first of the actions, and you can't really say then or so or whatever, unless you were to translate the first wayehis in some way, like Kenny did on his, so it came to pass or so it happened. Then you could translate then or at that time or use something there for wayelek. But you can avoid that just by not translating anything there except use when for the first Wayahis. Any questions on that? And by the way, if you would turn, if you have your Hebrew Bible insert with you, let's point out something here about this. 2.2.3b. At the beginning of a narrative portion, Wayik Tol is often modified by a preceding circumstantial clause, which may in turn be introduced by Wayahi. The sequence Wayahi plus circumstantial clause plus Wayik Tol begins or introduces a new section, a stage, or a scene in the narrative, often by notifying the reader of a change in time or circumstance. And this functions above the level of the clause. Now, in the older editions of this, I thought that he used macrosyntactic for the type of construction that was being used here. And this later edition has undergone some change. Let me see if I can back up here to the start of it and see if there's more here. Katal. No. Nope, I don't see it there. So evidently it's been changed. It used to be labeled as a macrosyntactical marker. Macrosyntactical marker. And I'll have to find that in the older one. I would really prefer that you get to understand what a macrosyntactical particle is. Macro means larger or greater. Syntax, of course, has to do with grammar. So if it's macrosyntactical, it means the syntax or grammar of the larger whole, of the larger context. Rather than microsyntax, which looks at individual words and relationships between words, this is looking at the entire context, a section, a paragraph. So that Wayahi and Wehaya both act as macrosyntactical markers. And that's for Wehaya and for Wayahi. Both of these are used as macrosyntactic markers. They will mark off a totally new section. You see it here at the beginning of a book, which is common. You'll find it in major sections. You'll find the Wehaya used quite often in prophecy, along with the wow correlative of the perfix. And you'll find Wayahi used primarily in narrative, where it fits in with the Wayik Tols that are utilized in narrative. So watch out for them. There'll be times when Wayahi is to be taken very literally. For example, when God said, Yehi or, let there be light, Wayahi or, so light came to be. That's not macrosyntactic. It's very clearly not marking off a section. It is following up upon exactly what God said. He requested that this happen. He commanded that this happen, and so it did happen. And so it's not macrosyntactical in Genesis chapter 1 in verse 5. But here in Ruth 1, it is clearly macrosyntactical by context. Okay, any further questions on verse 1? All right, let's go to verse 2. And John Strickland, let's move to you, if you would. And on verse 2, please read, instead of to the Athnak, read to the first Zakef Katon, the two dots above.
Bushem, Aish, Elim, Elek, Washem, Shiko, Naami, Reshem, Shenei, Banei, Shenei Banam,
Vanau.
Shenei Banam, Ma Elon,
Machelon.
Ma Elon, Wakilion,
Wakil Yom.
Kilion, Ephratim.
All right, just a word here on pronunciation. Washem, Ha'ish, Elimelech. Notice Elimelech. Washem Ishto. Notice the silent schwa, closing the syllable so that the tau has the hardening dogish to begin a new syllable. Naami, Washem Shanei Banau, Machlon, Wakilion, Ephratim. Okay? Okay, go ahead. Translate.
And the name of the man was Elimelech, and the name of his wife was Naomi, or the name of his wife Naomi. And the name of his two sons, Mahlon and Chilon.
Machlon and Kilion.
Kilo.
All right, good. All right, as we look at this, it's fairly straightforward. Notice we have noun clauses. We have to supply the verb to be, a form of the verb to be. We have a wow on a non-verb, but there is no verb given, so we can't talk about this as a necessarily a disjunctive clause. It does form background information, in that sense, qualifies a disjunctive clause, but is not probably talking about anything in contrast. And you do not need to translate the wow. If you put this inside a parenthesis, like we did with Genesis 1, verse 2, you could do the same thing. The name of the man's name was Elimelech, and his wife's name, Naomi, and his two sons' names, you'd probably want to make that plural, because by context there are two of them, and both names are given. Why didn't they put shame in the plural? There's probably no reason to make it a plural when it's so obvious, and just leave it as singular. And shame, in fact, I can't think of any case where name is used in the plural right offhand. There probably is one or two somewhere in the scriptures. But this would fit the names of his two sons, Machlon and Kilion, Ephrathites. The Ephrathites, as you're translating here, you could go through and you could put an M dash and then write Ephrathites. You could use a comma to separate, but if you use a comma to separate, it almost sounds like you have all these names and then you have this tagged on the end, and it's also like, it sounds like it's a separate group. You could just say something of the nature here. You could start as Ephrathites. The name of the man's name was Elimelech. That gives the idea that the names are Ephrathite, and there are some who take it that way. Others are just saying all that's they're doing here is to identify what region of Judah they are from and the clan in Bethlehem. The Ephrathite clan in Bethlehem was the clan. It was the clan of nobility. It was the upper class clan in Bethlehem. They were considered to be of very high class origin. We're not talking here about a low class of people. It shows by the fact they could afford to go and live in another land during a famine. They had the resources to be able to travel. They had the resources to be able to find lodging elsewhere and either to purchase or to rent a place to live during that whole time. And when they returned, remember, they still had land in Judah, and that's why Ruth had something that she could possibly inherit, and Naomi as well. So there's the reference to Ephrathites is very important here. It identifies the specific clan in Bethlehem of Judah that they were from. Any questions on the first half before we move on? All right, Scott Jackson, you ready for the second part, please? If you would read it, starting with the word right after that, Zakef Katon.
Bebeit Lehem Yahuda Wahavu
Wayavo.
Wayavo
Wayavo'u.
Wayabo.
U. Wayavo'u.
Vo'u. Sorry. Wayavo'u.
Yes.
Sadeh. Moab. Wa'ihu.
Wayihayu.
Wa'ihu. Shem.
Sham.
Sham.
Okay, good. Translate.
From the house for them, to them, of Judah, and they went to the country of Moab, and I put and were there, and were theirs.
Okay. Now, first of all, lechem is not lahem, it's lechem. That's not to them. Beit Lechem. Bethlehem. House of bread. It's from Bethlehem of Judah. Okay, they were Ephrathites from Bethlehem of Judah.
Why did they break that up? It always confuses me. We would write it as one word, and when they split it, I always end up trying to translate it separately.
Because many of the names in Hebrew where you have Beit that way, it's a separate word, and so they divide it, house of, right? Beit Aven, Beit Lechem, many others. All right? From Bethlehem of Judah, so they, and here I would use so or thus to translate the Wayik Tol, wow. So or thus they entered the country of Moab, or the fields of Moab, and they began to settle there. They began to, here you have the haya being used in a very idiomatic way. And it's showing transition, it's showing something beginning, it's not showing a state of existence, it's showing the start of that. And so they came to live there is another way to translate it, even though it's from haya, not from chaya. Right? Number of different ways. You just have to remember this is idiomatic, and you have a variety of ways to deal with it. Okay, any questions on verse 2 up to this point? All right, Jeff, if you'll go then to verse 3, and if you'll read all of verse 3 and translate it.
Vayama Elimelech ish Naomi Watishaef ki Ushne Bane Ha.
All right, and translate.
Then he died. Elimelech. Then Elimelech died. Naomi's husband. And Naomi's husband died. Then Elimelech died. I part do comma Naomi's husband. Then Sha'an. Then she remained. She again. Ushane. And her 2 sons.
Okay, can you smooth out the translation now?
Then Elimelech died, Naomi's husband. There's your ethnic. Then she remained with her 2 sons.
All right. Then Elimelech, the husband of Naomi, died. So she and her 2 sons were left. You could say were left, remained. You could also translate this as were bereaved, because that's the sense of bereavement. Bereave is to be left behind. Bereaved is to be left alone. And so some have suggested translating it as bereaved. To be bereft is to be left by someone. Okay? If you look at the diagram that I provided you, just going back here briefly, you'll notice that the subordinate adverbial clauses are, should be moved to the right halfway under wayelek, because they modify wayelek. Where did they go? Where did the man go? He went from Bethlehem of Judea. Where did he go to, or why did he leave to dwell or to sojourn in the field of Moab? And then you have the delayed subjects, and then you have the explanatory clauses giving their names. And then in apposition, you have Ephrathites from Bethlehem of Judah are in apposition to all of those that are named, Elimelech, Naomi, Machlon, and Chilion. And therefore I have a vertical line there just to the right of the double arrow of apposition. And you return to the narrative framework at Wayavo'u and then Wayihayu. And then in verse 3, you continue the narrative framework with Wayamat and Watishaer. Notice that Elimelech is in apposition to Ish Naomi. And therefore I have the double arrow there for that to indicate that apposition. All right? Any questions thus far? Yes, Jan?
Definite than the husband of Naomi.
Yes, it's definite because Ish in construct with Naomi is a definite noun because it's a proper name. Therefore, the construct noun becomes also definite. It's not a husband of Naomi, it's the husband of Naomi. Okay?
Does that accent help you know which construct?
The munach under Ish is at least a partial clue, yes. Context wraps it up. All right? Any other questions on verse 3? Scott?
You said that they're in opposition to each other?
Apposition. Apposition. If you go back to Hebrew Bible Insert and you go to section 1.8.2, it's after dealing with the construct. You have apposition, 1.8.2, apposition. Biblical Hebrew frequently juxtaposes, that means to set together with each other, two nouns or nominal phrases asyndetically. Asyndetically or asyndetically means without a conjunction. Without a conjunction. So that the second defines the first more closely. The second element is in apposition or opposed to the first. And some of the examples of this, when the opposed name gives the office or relationship, as the hill of Samaria. And it's notice that hill is not in genitive construct relationship because it has the article on it. Hahar has the article, so it's not in construct. It is a noun in absolute form that is in apposition to Shomron, Samaria. And then if we look at another one here, Na'era Betula, a young woman, a virgin. Two nouns, side by side, meaning a young virgin. And so that's how you get the idea of apposition in apposition. Okay? Okay, any other questions on verse 3? Let's go to verse 4 before we take a break. And verse 4, we're at James. And if you will read through to the Athnak, please.
Waishu, Nachem, Nashim, Moaviot, Shem Ha'ahat, Arfa, Arpa, Washem, Hashanit, Ruth.
All right, and translate.
And they took for themselves Moabite women. The name of one was Orpah, and the name of the second was Ruth.
Okay, Wayis'u. So they took lahem, here's for them, right? The lamed preposition, and hem is the third masculine plural pronominal suffix. For them or for themselves. Nashim, women or wives. Moaviot, Moabite wives, Moabite women. Okay? They took for themselves Moabite wives. And this would be an apposition as well. Nashim could be an apposition to Moaviot. Notice that I did not diagram it that way. I used the second part as the apposition part, but this could also be these two words, Nashim and Moaviot. The name of the one, you could also translate it as the first, since you have second used later. The name of the one or the name of the first was Orpah. Notice that the comments under the ayin is in a closed, unaccented syllable. Notice the dogish lene and the pei, the Bagad Kafath letters. The pei has the dogish in it because it begins a new syllable following a closed syllable. That means the schwa under the resh has to be silent because it's closing that syllable. Therefore, or is a closed, unaccented syllable, makes it a kametz hatuf. And that's why the name of this woman is not Arpa, spelled with an A, but Orpah, spelled with an O. It's a kametz hatuf. So it's Orpah, and the name of the second, Ruth. All right, good. Then let's go to... yes? Question?
Idiom again, they took wives from themselves. Could you say they married?
They took wives from themselves. Yes, you could say they married. They married Moabite women. That'd be fine.
You're saying married from...
Married for took wives.
From Nassau?
Married for took wives. Both the verb and the noun together. In other words, Vayisa'u lahem nashim, that can be taken as they married. They married Moabite women. And the Moabite, Moaviot, is Moabite women. It's a feminine plural.
I missed on Nassau that they used...
Nashim can be used as woman or wife. Okay? It's an irregular noun, takes a masculine plural ending, even though it is from Isha, the feminine noun.
I think I had he lifted up or something.
Oh, okay. Right. Yeah, the he lifted up is actually the Wayisa'u, Nasa, there. All right? All right. That's an idiom for marrying, is to take for oneself a woman. Means to marry. So Jan's correct. You could translate it that way. Okay, any other questions before Eric translates? Okay, Eric, if you'll take from Ruth on, the word after Ruth.
Wayesh Vu Sham Keser Shamim. And translation. Then they lived or dwelt there for 10 years.
Okay, for about 10 years. Notice the kaf. The kaf preposition tells as or like. And it's being used idiomatically to say for about. They lived there about 10 years. Now notice the change of verb. The verb has gone from being gur to yashav. Some have suggested that this indicates that they went there intending to be sojourners, resident aliens, lagur, back in verse 1. But after a while, when the famine continued longer than they expected, they were actually making plans to stay much longer, and therefore the writer speaks of it as residing, settling down. They settled down for about 10 years. Very interesting approach. It could be nothing more than just a variety of words, the same as we do in English, rather than trying to make too much of it. And that's something we have to be very cautious of. Be cautious of making too much of the differences between synonyms in the same context. Sometimes that can be perfectly accurate, other times it can be very precarious to try to do it. If you would have additional information, which would help to establish that this was a definite change in attitude and what their plans were, then fine. But in this context, I think that's a precarious interpretation to say that, well, they finally decided, well, we'll just stay here forever because the famine's just going on and on forever. I would look at this as Yashab being just a more generic term that includes Gur. the same as Amer, he said, includes all the different kinds of saying, whether it's praying, commanding, speaking, singing, or anything of that nature. Okay? About 10 years. The question was just asked, where can I go to get some examples of pronunciation, to help with pronunciation? There's R.G. Murray's website, has a link there to a sound file that has me reading Psalm 19. You can go there and check that. And we'll have several other sound files available in the near future that will be made available on my website for reading Hebrew. And you could always just go to various Hebrew websites where they have sound files of the Bible. I've got a link to one of those on my own website under links, where you can go and hear some. Keep in mind that they use modern Hebrew pronunciation, however, rather than biblical Hebrew pronunciation. Okay? All right, let's continue on then. We're at verse 5. And we've gone through Eric, and we're down now to David. And David, if you will take verse 5, read the whole thing, please.
Wayamuthu, Gam Shemehem, Machlon, Wakilion, Tishaer, Haisha, Mishneh, Yoladeha, Umeisha.
All right, good. Good reading. Okay, and then translate, David.
Then they died, even the two, Machlon and Kilion, and she and the wife was left without her two sons and without her husband.
All right. As we look at this, let's first of all read through it so you can hear the pronunciation. Wayamuthu, Gam Shenehem, Machlon, Wakilion, Watishaer, Haisha, Mishneh, Yeladeha, Umeisha. Notice that the mapik in the final hey there, you have to either say something like Misha or Mishah. Don't try to make it a cheth, though. All right? Then, both Machlon and Kilion also died. That's the way you can translate the first half. Then, both, for Shenehem, both Machlon and Kilion also, Gam, died. All right? The way David translated is perfectly acceptable. So the two of them also died, Machlon and Kilion. Or the two of them, Machlon and Kilion, also died. Watishaer, so she, here would be the woman, Haisha, so the woman remained. And you have here without, used for min, that's the way David translated it. Min can be used that way, as what we call a privative concept. Without her two children, literally, using Yeled instead of Ben, son. Without her two children, or without her two sons, and without her husband, Ishah, her husband. The her is the comets under the sheen, and the hay with the mapik in it. Now, another way to translate this is to translate, as I mentioned before, sha'er, as to bereaved. So, the woman was bereaved of her two children and her husband. Because to be left from could be taken as bereaved. So you have both of those options for translating. I think you're beginning to see, as we're going through, that there is often more than one legitimate, more than one accurate way to translate from the Hebrew. There's room for a variety of English translations. And that's because you can use different vocabulary to say exactly the same thing. You can put your words together slightly differently and still say exactly the same thing, the same meaning, translating the same words, and even translating basically word for word. You can still end up with two different translations. So as you think through this, it should affect your overall philosophy of translation, and it should affect the way you evaluate translations of the Bible. Because we could give valid arguments for both of these being what we would call an essentially literal translation. Essentially literal translation in several different ways. Okay, any questions on verse 5? Yes, James?
The main prefix being used as without, you called it a certain name. What was that?
Privative. It has a privative concept. Privative means to negate. For example, we have what is called the alpha privative on words, like we had on asyndetic in Putnam. Like in atheist, the alpha privative negates. And here we have a min privative, in that it negates, and it's meaning without. Without. Okay? All right? Any other questions on verse 5? Whenever I use a grammatical term that you're unfamiliar with or you need to have identified or defined, please ask, because I don't want to be speaking in tongues up here with no interpreter. We want to have interpretation all the way through. All right? John Melcon, why don't you take verse 6 and please read through to the Athnak.
Watakam he wakalot beha watasha misade moab.
Okay, and translate.
Then she stood with her daughters-in-law, and she returned from the land of Moab.
Okay. Now, as you could tell, John was feeling a little bit uncomfortable with translating, and she stood. Because it sounds awkward, doesn't it, in English, to translate cum here as stood. Some try to get away from that by saying, okay, they arose. She arose. She and her daughters-in-law arose. Why do we have a feminine singular verb? Because you have a compound subject again. And in a compound subject, you then normally have the verb agreeing in gender and in person and number with the first of the compound subject. Compound subjects are she and her daughters-in-law. Okay? So as we're looking at that, we would say she and her daughters-in-law arose or stood, or rather, we ought to take it as being a case of an introductory verb. One of those introductory verbs that we talk about in introductory imperatives that just is idiomatically giving the idea of something being done quickly, urgently, or in some other matter. And we could say here, so she and her daughters-in-law immediately returned from the country of Moab. We could say immediately. We could say soon after. There's any number of ways of trying to convey the idiom of using a form of the verb cum in conjunction with the main action, which is the verb shuv, to return. They were not lying down. That's not why they're rising up or standing up. They weren't sitting down. This is totally idiomatic. We can tell it's idiomatic because there's nothing it fits with as a literal action. And so I would prefer to combine takam and tashav into one concept and talk about she and her daughters-in-law returned immediately from the country of Moab. That'd be my preference. John.
Two things. One, Does it have the idea of uprooted, where they were settled there, and so she's just pulling up tent stakes and that sense of a rising or standing? Would that be anything else?
It could possibly be. I do not know of anyone that takes it that way. It'd be interesting to find out if there's any potential of that. It fits in English idiom, where we say, we packed up the tent and went, But the concept still is it's a matter of doing something fairly immediately.
And then is it wrong to put, then she arose with her daughter-in-law, to put the emphasis that she did
I would
this?
not say with, and I would not say she, because by that you're doing something different. You're implying that there's a preposition used before her daughters-in-law with kaloteha, and there's no preposition used here. Secondly, it ignores the Hebrew grammar that says when you have a compound subject, and it's still a compound subject, it's not someone doing something together with someone. It's not the focus and emphasis upon her. It's just the fact that in Hebrew, the first person or the first group of persons in a compound subject is that with which the verb agrees, even though all are the subject to the same verb. Because they're considered a unit. Correct. All right? And I believe we can see that also in Hebrew Bible insert. Here we go, 1.3.1a. Preceding a compound or multiple subject, the verb usually agrees with the PGN, the person, gender, and number of the first subject listed, although following verbs are often plural. Okay? All right, anyone else? Back to verse 6. Any other questions on verse 6a, the first half of verse 6? Okay, thank you, John. And then we're going to move over to Kyle. And Kyle, if you will first read after the Athnak to the end of verse 6.
Ki Shamia Shama'a Bisade Bisde Moab Ki Paquad Yahweh
Ki Fakad.
Pakad Yehovah.
Just don't ever pronounce the vowels on it because they're artificial. They represent Adonai. So you just want to say Yahweh.
Yahweh. Eth Amo Latheth Lahem Lahem Lahem.
Notice those you have Lahem, Lachem.
That's right.
All right? The hay and the chayf.
Okay. That
Probably should be because.
okay, because she heard
Yes.
in the fields of Moab that
Good.
Yahweh had judged his people.
Lateth is one of those very rare types of situations where you have only one root letter showing. Do you remember what verb it's from?
I can't remember.
It's the cal infinitive construct of Nathan. The first noon has disappeared and the last noon has disappeared.
That's right.
And it's infinitive construct. There's no noon.
Okay.
It's just midnight.
To give to them food.
Right. Great. Fantastic. Why do we have lachem instead of lechem as the last word? Why has the segol changed to a comma in the last word? Scott.
Right before the end of the word, so it tightens.
All right. It's in pause. It's in pause. It's at the end of the sentence. It's in major pause, whether it's at the athnak or whether it's at the saluk and sof pasuk. Here are the saluk and sof pasuk. And therefore, lechem for food should not be translated as bread. You could translate as bread. And some make an argument translating as bread, even though it may not mean literally bread, that it's just a Hebrew idiom for food. But in such cases, I prefer just translate as food rather than bread, because it gives some people a wrong concept, wrong information. All right, let's go right back through this again, verse 6. So she and her daughters-in-law immediately returned from the country of Moab, because she had heard in Moab, and I didn't repeat in the fields of Moab here, you could say in the country of Moab, that Yahweh had visited his people to give them bread, or to give them food. Bread, literally, food, I would take as being the meaning here by context. After the famine that was talked about in verse 1, the Ra'av. Any questions here on verse 6? All right, Chad, you're now in the hot seat. Verse 7. And if you'll read through to the Athnak, please.
Watetse min hamakum asher hayatha shama ushte kalotheha imma, and will be translated, and she went out from the place which was there, and her two daughters with her.
Her two daughters-in-law.
Your two daughters-in-law with her, yes.
Okay, as we look at this, Watetse min hamakom asher hayata shama ushte kalotheha imach. The hayatha is a cal perfect third feminine singular. So it's where she was. Where she was. Okay? Notice that she, Naomi, is the one who is the one being focused on here, that she's going out. And here we do have the two daughters-in-law connected at the end with as a compound subject that is left to the end, a delayed topic. And notice that's with her, imah. So you have the preposition used in that way. So we could translate it, so she and her two daughters-in-law with her went out from the place where she was. And because we've taken a compound topic or a compound subject approach, we could also say where they were. Okay? But hayatha, third feminine singular, where she was, literally. Shammah is there, sham, but then we have an on the end. And that is called a hey directive or hey locative. And it's really in there or to there. From the place where she was there. Where she was. And so there really is combined, the Shammah is combined with the Asher to mean where. Any questions on the first half of verse 7? All right. Franz, want to read from there to the end of verse 7 and translate, please.
ותלכנה ופרק לשוב אל ארץ יהודה. So she went on a way or on a journey to return to the land of Judah.
Okay, now notice here we have a third feminine plural verb. Notice the na ending. Watelakna. Watelakna. And so it's a cal, imperfect, third feminine plural. So they went. Okay? They went on the road to return, or on the journey, as Franz translated, is perfectly legitimate. Derek, way can be used of a journey as well as the road on which the journey is traveled to the land of Judah. Okay. Any questions on verse 7? Yes, Greg?
Can you just repeat the translations?
The translation of all of verse 7? Or just last half? So they went on the journey to return to the land of Judah. Or you could say on the road to return to the land of Judah. Either one is acceptable. All right? Let's move on to verse 8 then, Greg, if you will read to the Athnak.
Watomer, Naamim, Lishtei, Kalotea, Lekna, Shovna, Isha, Labet, Ima.
All right. Good reading.
Then Naomi said to her two daughters-in-law, spoke to her two daughters-in-law, saying, the next couple words I'm not grasping.
Okay, lekna is an imperative, feminine plural. Shovna is an imperative, feminine plural. The first one from halak, the second one from shuv.
Go, return. Women?
Isha is singular.
Wife or woman?
Here it's going to be used as each.
Okay. Each woman to the house with.
Not with, it's an aleph and not an ayin. To the house of?
To the house of hers, her own.
Her mother. Im here is from aim, meaning mother. All right? So Naomi said, or then Naomi said to her two daughters-in-law, and literally it says, go, return. But this is an introductory imperative, and it means return immediately, each to her mother's house. Each to the house of her mother. Any questions? I believe we talked about the introductory imperatives before. But it's in 2.2.4 of the Hebrew Bible insert. And it's talking here about the volitional forms may also follow an introductory imperative. Usually it'll be from halak, bo, kum, and occasionally yahav, which seem to introduce the main action. And as you look at that in Judges 19, verse 28, kumi weneleka is get up, let's go. And it's obvious here that it's meant literally, not as an introductory imperative, because the woman is described, the concubine of this Levite is described as lying on the doorstep at the door of the house. That's where they find her when they open the door in the morning. So it's obvious she needs to get up. But in other places, it does not mean get up, such as when in Jonah chapter 1, when Jonah is commanded by God to go to Nineveh. It's not because he's lying down, but later in Jonah 1, when he went down into the belly of the ship and he has gone to sleep, obviously there it means get up physically. And so the context tells you whether to take it as introductory or whether to take it as physically. In Psalm 95 verse 1, Laku niranena ale Yahweh. Come, let us shout for joy to Yahweh. The come doesn't mean you have to come. It doesn't mean that they're not there. It's the idea of let's shout for joy to Yahweh right now. And so you don't translate the introductory imperative. All right, let's go on then to 8b. James Wood, we're over to you.
Ya'asa, Yahweh.
Ya'aseh.
Ya'aseh, Yahweh. Imakem. Chesed. Ka'asher. Asitem.
Esitem.
Ham. Im. Hametim.
Hametim.
Hametim. Wa. Aweh. Imadi.
All right, good. Okay, and translate?
Let's see. Say Yahweh. Let Yahweh show or use.
Okay.
Show faithfulness or loyalty with you, to you.
Okay.
As you did to the dying, with the dying, and with me.
Okay, good. Now, we have some things here we need to talk about. And it'll be the last things we do today in class. First of all, Ya'aseh is obviously, the way James translated it was correct. He used let because it's obvious that it's subjunctive. And you could translate it may Yahweh, or you can say let Yahweh. Then asa is used idiomatically with chesed. Loving kindness is a translation is often used. It's better to use steadfast love or loyal love. So the idea is may Yahweh perform, or may Yahweh show, which is one of the ways James translates, show loyal love to you, literally with you here, just as you showed, understood, loyal love to the dead, Metim, the two sons of Naomi, and to me, Imadi, literally with the dead and with me. And she could perhaps be referring to her husband as well, but I think specifically here to the two sons that these two women had been married to. The question comes, why do we have a masculine gender used of these daughters-in-law? May Yahweh do with you, imakem. Kem is second masculine plural pronominal suffix. Esitem, kal, perfect. Second masculine plural. Why do we have masculine gender used of these two daughters-in-law in this place? And many of the grammars, many of the commentaries at this point will say there is a textual corruption, and that these ought to be changed, that the mem sophete should be changed to a nun sophete, so that it reads second feminine plural instead of second masculine plural. But the evidence for doing so is so small that it's really being done as a conjectural emendation. The better question to ask would be, why would the grammar perhaps legitimately choose to use the masculine here instead of the feminine? And I think it's very legitimately seen here that there are two possible ways to show the attraction. One is that she is thanking her daughters-in-law for what they have done in showing loyalty to her. And that loyalty is really embodied in the fact that they are loyal to their husbands. And so they are, as members of the family, through Naomi's sons, then being spoken of as though still representing those sons, and therefore being masculine. Another possible way is that it is attracted to the fact that we have here, may Yahweh do, perform, show loyal love. And it could be being attracted to the fact that as Yahweh did, so they would do. And since Yahweh is masculine, singular here, then their verbs and their pronominal suffix are changed to a masculine in attraction to what Yahweh has done. That she's actually seeing in what they do, Yahweh's loving, steadfast, loyal love being shown. And so those are the two possible explanations. Both of them are very legitimate. And both of them have some exegetical significance in the way then that would be looked at. How do you determine this? How do you resolve it? Which one of those two potential possibilities are there? You would have to do a study throughout the entire Bible, looking in the Old Testament, looking at different ways that you have women spoken of and the actions they perform. And if there are any contexts elsewhere where we have feminine subjects that are doing something like Yahweh does, and see if the same type of attraction of gender in the grammar is followed. And then that would be the means of trying to rule it in or rule it out, and which one would fit. But I think that we need to look for a logical explanation rather than seeking to alter the text. It's too consistent here. You have it twice in verse 8, and we're going to have it again in verse 9. It's repeated. And if it is an error, then could it be something else? Could it be that this is part of a Bethlehemite or Ephrathite dialectical choice? That's always another choice to look at. But my point is, let's not be hasty to change the text when there are legitimate answers to give, to offer reasons why we have an apparent disharmony in the gender that is used in these two verses.